There has been a fierce campaign against Qatar hosting the World Cup. The country's religion and values dictate a certain stance on the consumption of alcohol, on LGBT matters, in fact, any public display of affection or sexuality. And they're happy that way. Why should the West shove so-called liberal values down others' throats? And what puts us in a better moral stance anyway? Our horrendous invasion of Iraq or our treatment of refugees in detention centres? And on another note, we should advocate for the rights of migrant workers. But why this selective attention? Well, lots of our own clothing is made by oppressed, underpaid workers. If you were Qatari or Muslim, wouldn't you feel like this is a racist, targeted campaign filled with hypocrisy?
Josh.
Well, I might feel that way. I'd be mistaken if I did feel that way. I don't think that we need to... Look, there are a couple of things going on. There is a lot more that you can achieve by doing business with awful states than by excluding them from the community of nations. So I don't think that excluding Qatar from being able to host something like the World Cup actually achieves anything. We've been able to achieve successful reforms in Qatar by pressuring them on human rights and so on. They're certainly likely to be more open and less regressive than they would have been had the World Cup never happened in Qatar. But on the question of whether or not we have anything to be proud of in the West, whether or not we have a leg to stand on, I do fear that we're losing our sense of what made us as successful as we are. And I mean, this is a delicate thing to talk about, but I hear it all the time from listeners. I hear a fear that we're getting so kind of intellectually tied up in our own knots about how bad we are and our participation in the Iraq War and our participation in global capitalism and what an irredeemably white supremacist country we are, that we've lost our ability to speak clearly about problems in other countries.
I think the question, though, was... Yes, there was some moral relativism in the question, but the question also went to hypocrisy. Does he have a point about hypocrisy?
Yes, I think you're always going to be hypocritical. I think because we're all imperfect, there's always going to be an element of hypocrisy to any charge. But I don't think that you can compare a regime like Qatar's to Australia.
As a sports person, Nova, what went through your mind when you competed? Because, of course, you know, any country that hosts these big events are going to be open to scrutiny. Australia's hosting the Women's World Cup next year, and our people are the most impoverished and imprisoned people in the country, if not in the world. And yet Australia will be hosting that event. 2032, the Olympics will be in Brisbane. And again, First Nations questions or questions of treatment of refugees. What can sport bring to highlight these issues and bring about change?
Well, sports... To me, it's an equaliser to begin with, like in terms of if you're an athlete, like there'd be so many, I'm sure, soccer players that are there who've come from impoverished backgrounds. And education and sport are our equalisers in life. I know myself, when I competed at the Sydney Olympics, there was a number of us Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander athletes that competed. I remember I was asked to boycott because of, you know, the circumstance of Aboriginal and people. And I remember Charlie Perkins saying, burn, Sydney, burn, you know, going into those
And I remember
games.
You running with the torch, and I was there with you, and you ran barefoot to make the statement, didn't you? I
did, because people had said, you know, and it was 3 weeks before the Olympic trials, and I ran 1.9 kilometres barefoot, 0 degrees, and I didn't get a stone blister that whole time, and the Olympic flame went out bloody 3 times that day. So there were spirits looked after me, but the point was, people had said, is it an honour, you know, first of 10,000 people to carry the Olympic flame? Yes, it's an honour, but you know what? The people on one side of the rock, the people, the 5-star resort, they forget that on the other side of the rock, the Murujulu people live in fourth world conditions. You know, they're living off a diesel generator. So sport is also a platform where people come from those impoverished countries that we use it to elevate, give themselves a voice to address certain things. And what I think this can do is, like what you said, you know, let's hope that after the soccer, our human rights issue is going to get better. But you're right, Stan, in you know, what's going to happen with the 2032. I know the 2032 Olympics was won on an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legacy that's going to be get left behind. That was a big part in Australia winning. So, like I said, it's important to have all our ducks and lines to ensure that, you know, there aren't going to be the protests that we can.
But it does provide a platform. Doesn't it?
Absolutely, and it's not going to go away. Athletes will always use that platform.
And we've seen that. We've seen that in Qatar.
It goes back to 1956 Olympics as well.
That's right, with Tommy Smith and John Carlos.